Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us remotely, we have Mike Gross, who's the Head of Global Identity and Fraud Product Innovation at Experian. We're going to learn how the corporate sector, government entities, and consumers are all at grading risks of phishing scams. Mike, it's great to have you with us. And in times like this, when there's a heightened level of crisis, a pandemic, any other catastrophe, if you will, you're always going to get scammers that are taking advantage of it, which is why sometimes we can't have nice things. But the recent attacks, such as the one against the CDC and the WHO, do you think that will continue to increase as fraudsters take advantage of a weakened system?
Pleasure to be here, Jill. And yes, the answer is unfortunately, fraudsters are great marketers in a crisis, and they thrive on people's curiosity, their desire to help, and these endless news cycles around the clock that are kind of following the sun as the pandemic broke out in different countries of the world. We saw phishing attacks also spike in those different countries. And frankly, as you mentioned, with the World Health Organization and CDC sites seeing additional email campaigns and phishing campaigns, businesses are working really hard around the clock to keep up with this crisis, and many of them are overwhelmed with all the new programs and these flood of applications that have come in for things like small business association loans. And IT teams as well are also kind of inundated right now. There's really no precedent for this from a risk management perspective. So fraudsters have this enormous threatscape right now that they can try to take advantage of, whether it's regarding recent stimulus or aid programs, payment deferrals, unemployment benefits, new healthcare programs or healthcare sponsored programs that consumers can leverage. There's also things like fake charities popping up, asking for donations. So doing your due diligence becomes really important. There's a lot of too good to be true, virus cures being promoted, or silver bullet products to help protect yourself from getting the virus. And I think the common guidance is just, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, and folks need to be vigilant to protect themselves in this heightened environment.
So how would businesses need to ensure their remote workforce is aware and paying attention to these increasingly sophisticated attacks? And I would argue that some of these tips are great for us on our personal computers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a really good reminder of the potential that individuals, as they're now forced to work from home, have that potential to destroy the business's trust with customers. So we all have, that responsibility to continue, serving and protecting our customers and being responsible with their data. So that involves making sure they have the right technical controls in place. Many organizations, kind of were scrambling to put the controls in place in a really short period of time. And unfortunately, that can lead to security being a bit of an afterthought, especially for mid-size and smaller organizations. They had to do a quick search for new tools that gave them this ability to engage with their employees and serve their customers. But unfortunately, those new processes expose some gaps that attackers can exploit. There's more personal use of company devices. There's employers who've never worked remotely before and don't have proper training. And then there's fewer security controls around home networks typically than in the office. So this notion of newly remote workforce and having proper controls in place is really important for organizations of all sizes.
We spoke about the 2020 Global Identity and Fraud Report that your group had put out earlier in the year, and 88% of consumers say their perception of a business is improved when a business invests in the customer experience, namely in security. Yes, this is bad what we're going through right now, but when we look on the other side, when we try to spin this in a positive way, what can we learn from this? I feel like the way that we conduct ourselves personally, professionally, how we approach work from home going forward is going to change forever.
You're absolutely right. I mean, no one knows exactly what the future is going to hold when it comes to coming out of this pandemic. But we can be really certain that there's going to be some significant fall-on effects, both in terms of how businesses enable remote workers and how consumers interact with businesses. Think of how you shop today versus how you shopped a month and a half ago. Think of how your kids learn today versus how they did a month and a half ago. This is impacting our lives on the social side, as well as the work side, as well as everything we do from commerce and education as well. But fraudsters also are taking advantage of this. And in terms of fraud, there's also going to be some fall-on effects from COVID-19. Phishing has undoubtedly dramatically increased as we expected in light of this. But it's important to remind folks, this is consumers and businesses alike, that phishing doesn't itself cause losses. It's the gaps in the controls that organizations may not have proper layered controls in place to defend against themselves against these more sophisticated or multi-channel attacks. That's what leads to these increases in losses. So in this area where you've seen a lot of compromised data, businesses have to have a layered approach to identity proofing. And that goes from the point that they interact the first time with the customer at an account setup, when they're authenticating that consumer or recognizing that consumer, to your earlier point, and then at the time that they're actually submitting a transaction. It's important to make sure they've got the right controls based on the right level of risk that they're perceiving at any given point in time.
It seems so challenging because it feels like every time you do get it under control, it's just there's another step ahead. It seems like you're always trying to be reactive and proactive at the same time.
You're exactly right. And in fact, that's one of the interesting dynamics of this type of crisis is, aside from a few areas, nobody really had a chance to prepare for this. So proactive measures have kind of gone out the window. And in our conversations with clients, their focus right now is how do they just react to all the things that they need that is different today than what it was a month ago. And that's everything from customer service to how many applications they're seeing online versus what they were traditionally seeing, a lot of in-person requests, to this flood of applications for things like the SBA loan program. You can imagine going from some organizations may have seen 2,000 applications in a year, and now all of a sudden you've got a community bank seeing 3,000 plus applications in 5 days. They're just not set up to scale to that kind of problem. And organizations have been doing a phenomenal job reacting. And I think what we'll see at the end of this crisis is organizations will come back and do a retrospective on their own process and say, what could we have done differently to be more proactive, to get ahead of this before the next pandemic or the next crisis occurs. And I think we'll see a lot of investment into these type of layered programs to make sure that they've got the right controls in place, the right processes in place to enable their business to continue as well as to thrive in this kind of scenario.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for catching up with us.
My pleasure, Jill. Thank you.
You got it. And thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.